Welcome to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham. Today's guest is Manny Medina, exec chairman and co-founder of Outreach. Manny's journey is a masterclass in scaling from startup to industry leader.
He's got lots of great stories to share about that journey, as well as his thoughts on leveraging AI to redefine sales productivity and what's next for the sales profession.
From building new market categories to embracing the power of AI, Manny's perspective is as fresh as it is foundational. This was truly one of our favorite episodes. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the ZI Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
I'm Millie Beetham.
We are absolutely thrilled to be here at ZoomInfo Labs Studios with a very special guest, the one and only Manny Medina of Outreach. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. We finally get to do this.
Yeah, we're pumped. We're really excited. We're going to get into a bunch of stuff, and we'll go into the sort of the meat of this over time. But maybe we just start with, you had a big announcement last week of sort of stepping up into this exec chairman role. Talk to us a little bit about, all the latest at Outreach and how you're thinking about it.
So when we look at the what's going to define our category again for the next 10 years, I don't think it's a secret that it's going to be AI. And, a lot of the things that we're seeing in the market right now are sort of a little bit of low-hanging fruit, right? Like you're seeing like these agentic releases of, inbound lead qualifiers, that kind of thing. I think that is just scratching the surface of what's really possible. Because if you think at the great majority of companies out there, they make their money on expansion. They make their money on new product launches. They make their money on expanding new personas. And that is not solved yet. You see what I mean? And that's where AI has a maximum impact. So when we think about like all the transformation, all the human change transformation that is going to happen over the next 10 years, it's got to be driven by AI. And when I think about the alignment of the company, for Outreach in particular, we need to realign back to being a product-led company, just like we were when we started the company. And Abhijit brings all those attributes of being, he may not be an early stage founder, but he's a founder of businesses that can take businesses from X to Y with a product bent. And so I'm super excited to be back on the product, cutting edge, and looking forward. The team that he has built is just spectacular. The team that we're going to continue to build is going to be phenomenal. So I'm super stoked about the future.
Wow.
There is also this is the thing that we don't think about a lot. We are in this, the AI came just in time to catch this demographic change in which there is going to be less people in the workforce. So we worry about jobs going away, but there is actually a true phenomena of like there is, the majority of the working age is going to retire, and the new people that are getting promoted, they are not as many as they used to be. So AI is going to have to take up that slack, and it's do or die at this point, right? Like we have to be able to get adoption and get AI to start doing a lot of the work, because there's just not going to be that many of us going forward.
Absolutely, yeah. Population's declining. Right?
Exactly.
They're preparing for that in a lot of ways, and nobody is talking about that.
Nobody's
talking about that. It's like, oh, AI is coming for my jobs, but that's happening.
Yeah,
but
and you're about to retire in 5 years, so what's going to get happening?
Like somebody should come and fill that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, what will happen?
Exactly.
Right? TBD. This is an incredible achievement, Manny. Like for you to have gone, from practitioner all the way up to exec chairman now of the board. It's just an incredible achievement.
I appreciate that.
It's a really amazing time to be here, sitting with you, given that you're sort of coming to the final chapter, right, of Outreach in a way for yourself, right? Not for Outreach itself, but I think what I'd like to do is, as we start, let's roll back the clock a bit, because we've got to talk about where you started and all of those stepping stones.
It's so funny that we're doing this here, because we started here. I used to sling software in this perimeter. So 5 blocks away, this is my stomping ground.
And it was you and Andrew, I think you had said that you started it literally at an office right down here. Right?
Yeah, I was crashing on so there is a Israeli startup right next to Union Square. And they gave me a desk, and they gave me a desk in exchange for free software. So I was building Outreach and letting them use it. I was surrounded in the SDR pit, so we'll walk around, make sure that people are using it, and that was my feedback loop to make sure that we're getting product feedback. And this is my trick, right? So I would call all the startups around here, because there was a ton of them, and I would say, will you take a meeting with me? I'll do a demo. And they were like, sure. And they will think that it will be a video call. No, we show up in person. So, at the time of the meeting, they'll be like, what's the dialing number? What's the video call? And I'm like, no, I'm downstairs. So come up, I'll do the demo. And it's hard to say no when you're here. You see what I mean? Like it's really hard to say, I'm not going to try it. I'm like, all right, I will try it. And then you call that person back, and then you take person out for drinks, and that person introduces you to another person. And all of a sudden, everybody's a customer. So all my customers began here, including two of my largest customers.
Gosh, that's incredible. It's a full circle moment.
Yeah,
Like
it's all
by
here.
environment alone.
Yeah.
So how do we go from, you're like AWS employee 3 to like you're at Microsoft, you're building this sort of big business to I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Like what shifted between being sort of this practitioner, having somewhat of a career, right? Yeah. And shifting meaningfully to being like, okay, I'm going to incubate this idea. I'm going to take it to Techstars. And I mean, you were part of one of the most like successful Techstars cohorts of all time. Like that's how they talk.
It's funny
So,
that
like,
it didn't feel that way when I was there.
Yeah.
You know that we were last in my cohort.
That's
They have like a leaderboard?
Yeah, I mean, like you judge by the amount of fund you fundraise. We fundraised the least,
Got it.
and out of
These days, that's winning.
yeah, exactly. That back then it was winning.
But Matt Oppenheimer did really well. Remitly actually went public, and it's holding their own. And Zipline, I think, it also came out. And everybody else is not around anymore. So it was hard. It was hard going. So to answer your question, being an entrepreneur is crazy. So don't do it unless you're ready to take the pain. And don't try it.
ready for the challenge.
Unless you're really ready for the challenge, because your likelihood of failure is much higher than likelihood of success. And I think that the one thing that I got going for me is that we had incredible co-founders. I feel like I almost had the perfect team. And as you know, we're a pivot, right? So when the idea that we started with was not well suited for our superpower, but the idea that we came across, which became outreach, was extremely well suited for our superpower. And, when people ask me about this decision for being chairman, I told them, like, the decision for CEO wasn't that grandiose either. You know what I mean? When we started, I have 3 co-founders, and one is a back-end developer, and he's like, I'm going to sit down and write the back-end. The other one is a front-end, Wes is a front-end developer, so he's going to put in some screens together. Andrew's a designer, so he's going to start talking to customers and mocking things up. So the only job left was a CEO. You know what I mean? It was the job nobody wanted, because like it's all the other shit that nobody wants to do. You see what I mean? It's like the fundraising and cleaning the office and paying rent, and like we didn't have an accounting system, so everything ran on a check. It's hiring the salespeople, like doing all these other things, right? So it becomes more glorious over time, but the early days are
pretty grumpy, pretty like sweeping and shit kind of work.
That's
Sleeping
so
in
funny.
the office.
Like the short straw at the beginning.
Exactly.
I mean,
It's like the worst job.
Did you like fall?
Highly avoid it.
Did you fall into being an entrepreneur, or was it like so intentional that like one day you woke up and you're like, I have to go and create this company? Like you said, you had the right people, so that happened sort of organically. But did you come to the table with the idea? Was it over dinner? Like, how did it come together?
No, it was
over not dying. So we were, we got together. We came up with an idea that was GroupTalent, and GroupTalent just wasn't growing that fast, and we were running out of cash and just sort of like making payroll month by month. And in December 2013, a deal that was supposed to come in didn't come in, and all of a sudden we find ourselves with 2 months of payroll in the bank, and we're all freaking out as to what we're gonna do. So we decided to go and build this engine, this internal engine that would workflow the ability to create meetings, which means it will send out a personalized email, and then it will follow up. And the follow up was just bumping it to the top. Hey, do you get to see an email? Which it was not invented back then, right? And it generated 10x the volume of first meetings that we had before. Now, the problem then became that the 2 reps that I had were not able to talk to as many people as they were coming through. So I couldn't turn that into cash. So now I'm a month away from being out of cash. So we tried to pivot the company to sell appointments, so become an appointment setter in the recruiting space. But recruiters don't buy appointments. So when I tried to sell the appointments, people were like, how are you generating appointments? And they were like, well, I have this engine that follows up. The moment you reach out to somebody, they're like, stop, I want to buy the engine. I don't want to buy your service. So that's why we pivoted the entire company. And there's a couple of investors who gave us like, I think 75 grand, literally 75 grand. to make it through the pivot. And that's how long the pivot took. Like we had 75 grand to do or die. We came out on the other end, tried to sell tools to recruiters. Recruiters don't buy tools. And then we sold to AppDynamics, which was here in 4th and Mission. And they took me from recruiting to sales. And when they took me from recruiting to sales, and I did a demo and they bought 50 seats, I immediately left the building and called Andrew and me like, dude, I think we need to sell to salespeople. There's a lot more of them. You know, this company has 4 recruiters and 50 salespeople. I think the math kind of pencils out. And they were like, this can't be, you know, I'm sure that somebody else has this idea. And then we all went and did research and we came back and said, no, there's nothing out there that is doing this workflow point of view. So there are other companies that were bumping emails like Tout and Yesware, but nobody thought of it as a workflow, as a, you know, the goal of a communication is to get a meeting. And if you think about it, the goal of a string of communications is to minimize the number of touches it takes to get a meeting. So when we talk about like 7 touches, 9 touches, 12 touches, I mean, sure, but you don't want that many. You actually want the minimum. This is why AI is so important, because it's hoped to minimize the amount of time that you spend, you know, trying to get a meeting.
Yeah.
Totally. And look, along the way, you probably realize I have to become an expert in sales and marketing to make this company work.
Yeah.
Right? Like, goes without saying, you probably weren't yet at the time when you started.
That's a great point. Yeah.
You
So
know,
this is my biggest trick.
Yeah.
This is my biggest trick, because I would go and sit down with a CRO because I'm trying to sell them software.
That's only half the job. The only other half the job was to learn. You know what I mean? How do you run a sales organization? Like, what are the attributes of a sales organization? So, like, you know, I would pick out of my pool of customers, I had a subgroup that I called them as students of the game. And these people were like on my very short list that eventually, the one that I stuck with the most is Carlos de la Torre, who he took Mongo public, then went to Navan, then he became a CEO, and now he's at another company. But I learned so much from him. Like, I sat down and I was gonna, you know, he's the only one that has an obsession for pipeline generation. And I think he invented the word PGT, Pipeline Generation Tuesdays. And it's like high mass for him. You know what I mean? Like, the entire week revolves around this one day in which they generate pipeline, and everything else is like preparing to generate pipeline or debriefing on how did it go so we can do it again. And that point of view really helped me build that outreach. There's a couple of other ones. There is Lars Nielsen, of course, that everybody knows. Like, I think he invented, you know, sales development in tech. There's Karen, his sales ops, who had all the technical feedback for us. So, like, for like 2 months, we just built whatever came out of their mouth because they were so on it. You know what I mean? There's some people who can see the future, and we just build it today. And those are the people that I listen to and we build around. And there's many more. I'm drawing a blank right now, but those are 2 I distinctly remember.
And shout out to Lars. He's one of the best. Also one of the best ping pong players anywhere. The guy's a machine.
He's very competitive.
Yeah. Very competitive.
Sometimes so reasonably so.
Yeah. That's
Like,
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Can I come back to that, like, to some people who can see the future comment? I would argue that, like, in a way, right, you didn't know it, but you were seeing the future of this, like, sales engagement, sales automation as a category, right, as a market level category. That didn't exist. Like, I remember the days of, like, logging into G2 Crowd. We just had go to enable on the podcast.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember, you know, logging into G2 Crowd, and, like, none of the areas that now Outreach and so many others play in, like, even existed. Like, Did you have an aha moment? Did you see that was coming? And did that come out of having these conversations with these sort of, like, heavy hitters in the sales space, or did that come to you a different way?
It's a little bit of both. Like, the heavy hitters pointed us to the fact that there was a gap. There was like Salesforce where you force people to put in information, or CRM where you force people to put in information to run reports, but nothing that really helped the seller. So the seller had to do all these manual activities. And then what took us a while to figure out is that, are we a new category or are we an extension of an existing category? And that's a bit of a philosophical conversation, like, what are you? But it is super important, because whatever you pick is going to determine your destiny. So if you're an extension of a current category, so like, say, CRM, right? CRM existed before Salesforce. Salesforce put it on the cloud. So they didn't have to reinvent CRM, right? They just have to tell you there's a better way to consume it, and boom, you're off to the races, right? And that's an easier path than creating something completely new, completely out of nowhere. And the completely out of nowhere is a lot harder, because I would say that we're not even done crossing the chasm right now. Like, our market is, you know, north of 9 billion, maybe 10 billion. So if you think about it, we have 250,000 customers, or like active users, right? If you put all the other competitors together, you know, Gong and Clary, etc., Like that whole amounts to another 300,000, give or take, or maybe 400,000 total, right? So we as a group don't amount to 1 million. There is 6 million sellers in the US. And then, there's 4 times that in the world, right? So we're not even at the very beginning of penetrating this market. The market is a lot bigger, and it's because it's so new and people have to like wrap their head around it.
There's probably a lot that you learned along the way in terms of building and designing product. Let's go pre-AI, because it feels like AI changed everything for everyone. Yeah, all of a sudden. What do you wish you knew a couple of years ago that you didn't know 10 years ago that you learned along the way around how to architect this product?
So the one thing that I wish I would have done a little bit different is that my co-founders and I were obsessed about people loving the product. Like it wasn't, like it was a useful, no, you have to love it. And the bar for love is a lot higher than the bar for usability. Because the bar for love means that it not only is easy to get in, it's easy to use, but it gives you this regular satisfaction, right? That is sometimes unexpected, right? The biggest satisfaction is the one you did not expect, right? But I think we obsess a little bit too much in that vector, and this is why, because we were selling to end users, right? We started, I don't know if you know this, but when we started Outreach, we would sell to individual reps. And because it was the wild west of tech, nothing was locked, right? So like email was not locked, CRM was not locked. So anybody can plug anything in, connect it to email, connect to CRM, and off you go. Security didn't know about these things, right? So we would sell to individual reps, and every rep would make money. So we would make money from every rep, and we will be like, for the price of 2 lattes, you can triple your pipeline. It's like, yeah, of course, here you go, right? So we got to almost $1 million to selling to individuals, right? So it was only then that we had to pivot to sell to companies. The reason what I'm going with the story is that what we didn't think about is the dynamic of how does a manager use the application in a way that enforces particular patterns of use in the end user. And that was a bit of a religious argument with my own team, in that they really wanted to make sure that every single person loved the application for its own sake, as opposed to having a manager tell you what to do. Guess what? Life is not that way all the time, right? And the moment you go into very big companies, it's a manager who enforces the uses. It doesn't matter how good you are. And this top-down thing, we always said, oh, it's a crutch that bad designers use. It's not. It's just the way the world works. You see what I mean? And I wish I was a little bit more mature earlier on to say, hey, we need to ensure that whatever we release has a good manager experience to ensure that the manager is getting a ton of value out of it, not just the end user. Now we're growing older, but I feel like we would have had a different perspective in the market earlier on than we do today.
Are there any more of those sort of nuggets? We've just talked about like you pursuing sort of this category definition, right? Doing something before everyone else. There's not a lot of people to learn from necessarily, because people have not like built something, right. To learn from their, mistakes, etc. And, there's one chunk of knowledge right there around sort of building, right, for the enterprise, understanding sort of that enterprise and business to business use case versus sort of that single user. Is there anything sort of a third nugget around, things that you've learned that you would give as advice to entrepreneurs who are sort of pursuing this category definition type endeavor?
My advice for pursuing category definition is don't do it. It's super hard. It's super hard, and most of the time it doesn't work. Like it's kind of like it has survivorship bias. Like the ones that you hear about, mass the thousands that have failed. Yeah. You see what I mean? Like if you look at a company, like everybody already forgot about all the startups that were supposed to be mobile CRMs. Remember when that was hot for like a minute? Even Clary used to be a mobile CRM kind of app, and they had to pivot quickly because that thing was dying. So that junkyard is full of great ideas that never went anywhere in this search for new categories in the go-to-market space. So I don't know. Like it was a hard decision for us because there was this category called sales acceleration that was already established when we came into the market, and inside sales.com was the dominant player there. So they were the 800-pound gorilla. But if you peel the layers, there was nothing there. It was kind of like coffee, right? You do more stupid shit faster. That was the proposition. And we're like, that's not it. Like, it's not doing more things faster. It's to have a point of view on how do you get from not knowing somebody to get the first meeting, and how do you get that at scale? And then how do you go from the first meeting to get to make more friends in the account so you can multi-thread? And how do you go from there to a qualified deal, right? All those things are point of view, and then you have a process for it, and then you have software to enable that. And that was our point of view, right? But in that point of view didn't exist in the market. But look, if you can, don't create new categories because it's really hard. It takes up a ton of time and it's more hours than you need.
I feel like there's a lot of conversation right now about brand awareness. That was this concept. I did a webinar recently. We were talking about brand gen and this concept of brand generation. But I think it's a really interesting point that you make, because I do think most companies and founder, like, they want something to own, right? They want to feel like they have ownership, and whether it can be your brand, and it doesn't have to mean that you're categorically like defining a new market, right? And you should figure out like where that sort of like low, yeah,
it can like feel like you're defining a category, but then when it gets to like sort of macro, they still lump you in with like this is an established space. Yes,
exactly. There's a real strategy around like heeding that advice.
Yes.
And still feeling like you have that ownership, so
Right.
you pursue it, and you kind of get that.
Right. Not only that, but like, creating the category doesn't assure that you're gonna own the category. So it's like you're doubling the work for yourself, right? Whereas, so for instance, like, if you read Slootman's book, he advises heavily against new categories, right? He's like, just take established category and find a new thing that is gonna displace the old and make a lot of money. The Snowflake is Exhibit A of that, right? Like, you just displace Redshift, create something new, and now they're getting displaced by whatever else. But in the meantime, people make billions of dollars, right? Whereas the category building is a labor of love. You know what I mean? Like, you got to put in hard hours, and you still may fail.
Yeah.
All right, well, now you're causing Millie and I issues because I'm always trying to tell her we got to invent our own architecture. Like, it's not always.
But you can still do it on the back of another category. Like, there's nothing wrong with it.
It's like the top level. That's like a big Herculean effort.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think it's really topical given that AI is new tech. And so, like, I think there's probably many people out there listening.
Precisely.
They're thinking,
Precisely.
I have to create something totally new.
Right.
You don't
Exactly. But it does bolster new thinking around the same problem, right?
Yeah.
Like for instance, when you look at these, agents don't belong in CRM. Just think about that. Like, agents are a completely different thing that take data and take an action for you. They run alongside of you. They tell you what to do. They explain things for you. They're not systems of record. They're workflows. So like, all of a sudden you're getting out of your own category, and now you have an opportunity to really own something. So there is potentially, agents could be its own category with its own flavor, with its own thing. I mean, nobody's talking about it that way yet, but it totally has its own potential.
Maybe talk a little bit about early days of outreach in your own go-to-market. So not your customers' go-to-market, which obviously you're deeply involved in. Friend of the show, Mark Kosaglow, is a friend here. He was a big part of the story. But what were some of the things that you all did in the early days from a pure go-to-market perspective that you think really set you apart?
So the first thing we did is that we were big on cold outreach. Our marketing wasn't that great until probably the first Unleash, when we started, our name came out. In the meantime, we just cold people. Matter of fact, like, that was a thing when we went fundraising. We would go to VC and they were like, what is your go-to-market strategy? What is your SEO strategy? What's like, your branding strategy? And I was like, I fucking call people. That's it. Just make a list, check it twice, and call them. And then somebody will answer, and then you sell something. A lot of people were just, what? I'm like, yeah. Like, nobody's going to come to my website. That's the other problem with new categories. Like, nobody goes to your website because you're a new category. So SDRs actually help when you have people calling and saying, hey, this problem exists. Do you have this problem? Most people say yes. Like, who says no do you need more pipeline? Right? So everybody says yes, right? So the moment you say yes, I was like, let me show you this new way of generating pipeline. Boom, I got you on the phone. The moment I got you on the phone, I got a pilot. The moment I got a pilot, I got a customer. So our go-to-market was always heavily influenced by what we were really good at, which is cold outbound. The other choice that we made that was very unique to us was the fact that our first, so after Mark, I hired a CRO. His name is Matt Millen. You probably know him.
Yeah, met him a couple weeks ago.
And Matt came with, Matt before T-Mobile, he worked for Tony Robbins. And I was obsessed with Unleash the Power Within, which is one of the Tony Robbins.
What got inspired you on Unleash?
That's why Unleash is called Unleash, because that's why I inspired Unleash. And then we realized that Dreamforce had taken all the oxygen out of the sales show, so it was a preeminent shows for sale. But we started coming to Dreamforce, and Dreamforce was not for sales reps or managers. Matter of fact, you learn very little coming here. It was for ops. Dreamforce was built around, ops and trailblazers and that kind of audience, not to learn how to sell better. So we decided to, what if we build a show, an experience for reps and for managers where they can come and be better at their craft. Yes, we're going to sell some software, but first of all, we're going to make everybody better. It's going to be inspirational. It's going to be educational. You're going to walk better. You're going to walk out better than you came in. You're going to make new friends, and you will want to come back to the year after. And that was our biggest point of view. It became like our biggest driver of pipeline ever.
Yeah. It was the first one in San Diego or before that?
The first one was here in Napa.
Okay.
And the second one was in San Diego.
Okay. Awesome. Proud attendee. It was a great.
I was going to say proud speaker.
There you
and
go.
Attendee.
There you
go. I think I've watched more Unleash content over my years, or the content that came out of Unleash and then became, part of your, entire marketing strategy, than I would care to admit. I've nerded out on outreach. I've nerded out on Outreach's content marketing for probably 10 years now.
It was, and it's so, and it rallies the entire company, right? It becomes this one seminal moment where everybody comes together, and it's so awesome.
And next week or next year in Miami, right?
Yeah, it's gotta be big.
All right.
It's gotta be big. I'm excited.
I feel like where we could go next is at ZoomInfo in the go-to-market space. When you sell a go-to-market software to folks in go-to-market, you have this very meta opportunity to say like, oh, I'm using my own product to do my go-to-market, right? So we talk about it as like ZoomInfo for ZoomInfo.
Right.
I'm assuming Outreach for Outreach. Like, I'm sure many folks who are listening would like to know, like, how does Outreach use Outreach? Like, are there some like things that you've held dear in terms of the way that you use your own software internally to be most successful that have like never changed, that are things that people maybe don't do?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I have this one pet peeve that really drives me insane, is that one of the things that we built really early is task assignments within Outreach, and we we did it mostly because when you're prospecting, you want to get your execs involved, right? So you create tasks for them, and that brings execs in. We don't talk about it as much, and we don't use it as often. So I did tell my team that, so whenever they get a lot of pings, I was like, hey man, can you introduce me to blah, 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 blah. Because like after being CEO for God knows how long, right? Like at this point, I know everybody, because I either know the CRO because he was a VP of sales, when we started Outreach, or he was a manager when we started Outreach. Like, so that entire class that grew up with Outreach are now CROs. So, I got a lot of contacts. So a lot of people want me to like make intros. So they ping me an email, right? Or now in Slack. And I'm like, nope, submit a task.
Yeah, I love that. Because
then when you have a task, it's like a ticket, right? So you can see the SLAs. How long did it take me to get that deal through? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wish we would use it more. Shout out to those outreachers who are using it. But I wish we would use it more to start propagating, asking more people to get involved in your deals. Not only your people on your team.
I love that, though. That is like a good little tidbit.
Yep.
And how many CEOs are going to listen to this and go, okay, CEOs, CROs are going to be like, all right, that's the one thing I can implement and like make a big bet.
Right, there you go.
In terms of adoption, usage, and just general efficiency.
I feel like most people still live in this offline world when they do that.
Yeah.
Mostly on Slack and email, right?
They do it, but then you don't know, like you can't hold people accountable. Like you see a Slack, and what you got to do, we're going to read the next Slack, is it doesn't have the permanency that you need in a task until it gets executed. And then you can't have any, then you don't, I get a lot of CEOs telling me, oh, I'm so involved with the go-to-market team. And what's the last deal you drove? What's the last door you opened? Well, change topics, right? Like, whereas if it's in a place, then you can actually, brag about it. You can talk about like, who is involved in deals and who's not.
Yeah, that accountability is just there. It's right on paper.
Exactly.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit how the product has evolved. Obviously, you started in sales automation, sales engagement. You've added a whole bunch of other things to the suite with Kaya and beyond. Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about your thinking at the time of why to go multi-category, multi-product.
So they both had so we went from core pipeline generation, and pipeline generation is a workflow, right? When you say, I'm going to reach out to you, and my message to you, and I got a message to you, and I'm going to follow through, and I'm going to use graphics, maybe use other things, videos, etc., until I get the mix right. Pipeline generation looks exactly like expansion. So if you have a CSM workflow or like an account manager workflow, they look exactly the same, except that one is new for somebody that you know, and the other one is for somebody you do know. So the expansion, we recently announced our account manager expansion module, but I feel like that was a little bit too long. We should have shipped that right away because they both look the same. Then the expansion into Guide and Kaya was very literally, I got a cold call from a brilliant leader at Microsoft that said, hey, I have this idea about how to make conversational intelligence even better. At that point, Chorus was just, growing and Gong was just growing. And I don't know if you remember, TalkIQ was around. Like there was all these other companies that were just trying to crack that nut. And this guy came and said, look, it's not about the post-call experience, it's about in-the-moment experience. And it was an incredibly hard engineering problem to solve because you need to be able to, I don't know if you know this, but I think you have 5 milliseconds between a word utterance and you're listening to it and processing it. So it needs, whatever we pop in front of the rep needs to be within 3 milliseconds. And that problem is really hard to do. So, we found a way to solve it to create a real-time enabling experience that did not exist before. So that one was more a bit of a science experiment, to be honest, when we started, because nobody had came and asked, what we need? We need something that pops in the middle of your screen where you're having a conversation. Like nobody would say that. But we also didn't, you go to the future and you can't see a future in which the computer is not telling you what to say. You know what I mean? Especially if you think about this problem, right? ZoomInfo, for instance, right? ZoomInfo begins with one product, data, and then you add signals, and then you add org charts, and then you add ads, and then you see what I mean? And then you add. In each of those things, it may be sold to the same person, but it's a different value proposition. And at some point, you stop selling to sales, you start selling to marketing. And at some point, you need to talk to sales ops, and then you need to do marketing ops. And the pitch is different. So like if you introduce 3 new products to 3 new personas and say 20 markets in 5 segments, that's 200 and say something combinational, permutations of the same messaging. Nobody can keep that in their head. The rep will remember 2. And if you're good, 3. And that's where it ends, not 200. You see what I mean? So like this is needed. You know what I mean? Computers are great at this stuff and reps are not. So like that's the way we were thinking about it. Now, it took us a while to get it to market. It took us a while to make it performing. It took us a while to make it a thing. But we're still firm believers that the AI will be a full assistant through the whole thing. And then forecasting was just the sort of like the natural conclusion of this problem, right? Like we were looking at the available solutions for forecasting, and all of them were requiring reps to enter stuff. And I'm like, no, the forecasting is in the call. Just listen to the call and I will give you the forecast. Like there's no probability. That's stupid. And that's sort of it. Like you just go a little bit like a year ahead or 2 years ahead and be like, what is inevitable? And then build that.
Yep. And it's funny. It's like you named several things, even just in the last couple of minutes. They're like, AI changed that.
AI changed that. Exactly.
And like even just, shout out to all the Chorus engineers who spent 8 years architecting a product. Like, there was a lot of work. Pretty much wasted, right?
It's a ton of work. Yeah.
And now you can.
And like a lot of that technology was kind of janky. Like I don't know if you. I distinctly remember because I was with Mark. In a AISP. The AISP doesn't exist anymore, but remember AISP? So we were in AISP in this shitty hotel in Chicago. I remember because like the carpet was all bad and stuff. And like, TalkIQ, the guys were worrying about like a lab code and they were talking about like conversational intelligence wasn't even a thing. It was like, this AI thing that they were doing with recordings and it just didn't work. You see what I mean? So like
transcribing, translation.
Exactly. The translation was all over the place. Like the words didn't make any sense. Like none of it worked. And like it was magical when Chorus and Gong got it to work. Like it went from like not working to working, and all of a sudden you have a category.
You mentioned sort of the innovation, right, for the real-time enablement, sort of coming out of left field. Like how much, I guess, through your lifetime now at Outreach has that innovation come internally from you alone, from your peers, from your confidants? Like where have those new ideas sort of been born out of? Your customers.
Yeah, I mean, ideas come from all over the place. I mean, the trick is to listen. You see what I mean? Like to listen because it's something maybe a new good idea that you just don't. They don't come dressed up as new ideas. Like nobody comes and say this is $1 billion idea. Let's go there, right? So they usually come from either deep customer pain, or they come from a technological inevitability that it will change the world, and if you get there first, it will be yours.
the best thing, in absence of all that, the best thing to do is listen to your customers and do it. The problem though, and I think this was in one of your questions, is like, what was the last feature that customers asked you to build? Customers ask us to build all sorts of stuff. And if we were to go build that, outreach will look like a hot mess. Like it would not be a cohesive product. So you don't listen for feature requests, you listen for problems that haven't been solved, problems that are big. You see what I mean? And problems that are big keep coming up in different, in drag, right? They dress up differently in different places until you find out like, oh, this is a problem that has this particular solution. And, we're gonna, if you're good at it, you're gonna miss more than half the time. But the ones that you hit are gonna be awesome.
I mean, you must just be a really good listener, because I'm thinking about like, that's all coming from salespeople. And if there's any market or any set of users that's giving you like the most feedback ever, it's going to be like the sales team, right? I'm sure that's a little less in some other functions, but in sales, it's got to be super loud and super noisy.
Right.
And somehow you're distilling it into these things that are really the big heavy hitter problems and the ones that everybody has needed, right?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to love the category, you know what I mean? Because then you take all the feedback, you go think about it, and then one night you'll be like, aha, this is a thing. Let's go validate that. And then all of a sudden you turn out and build it. Like for instance, what you guys did of marrying, data with workflows was a little bit ahead of its time, right? Like it wasn't like nobody got it to work quite right, and it's working now. So it's even more difficult to come up with insights because something may not work in the past that will work in the future. So now AI makes AI and workflows, boom, totally work. But before Gen AI, it didn't work. It was kind of janky.
Yeah, pretty.
Or it worked up until you said, okay, now how are we going to send X number of messages in 200 versions out to the market?
Exactly. And that is a real problem. Exactly.
And that was a real problem.
And now it's solvable.
Yeah.
Speaking of and AI, we're going to switch into sort of AI mode and talk a lot about where outreach is going, your general thoughts.
But like, for instance, sorry to interrupt because you give me that. When last time we met before you joined the same, you had this harebrained idea of like creating dynamic images for outbounding, right? Like you're gonna go and solution the problem you're selling, put it on a screenshot and send that out. That was so hard. Like you had to do it manually, and you had like all these screens and all these generative things. So you were doing generative before generative as part of outbounding, and now it's possible.
I'll take it. It's a lot easier. It's still, I think, to your point, difficult to actually conceptualize what is the thing that's going to land. Then how do you build out all the elements? Like it's still not easy enough, but I mean, certainly producing the image.
Oh, but it's like miles easier than it was before. Like, that's what it was.
Absolutely. Have the outreach customers come and shown you how they're really seeing efficiency and ROI, like by taking advantage of these AI tools? Like, have you seen it in practice yet? And are they telling you where they're reinvesting?
So I'll tell you one better. They're demanding that I tell them where are they going to reinvest the go-to-market dollars when they do planning for next year. So you see us come to me and be like, where are my savings? I want the same production with less people. What am I going to do with the rest? And I want you to promise me that. And like, oh,
Okay.
well, exactly. All right. But it's true, right? Like at some point, this
has to show up the real dollars.
Yeah.
And they want to see the real dollars.
Yeah.
And how do you think that shakes out? Where do they end up reinvesting those dollars?
That's a great question. So I don't think, now that the economy is starting around, I don't think that they would have less headcount. I think that they would just keep adding headcount and just make it more productive. I think this gives them the ability. So for instance, every company tends to pick markets, segments, industries. You see what I mean? Because they're being productive. This advantage will allow them to try more things. You see what I mean? Because it's not as expensive to crack into an industry because you can just, AI, most of the thing, use a very small team to get it to crack into the same market. And all of a sudden you got a new market. You got a new product. So I think this is going to actually spin the flywheel of both product innovation and go-to-market innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I really if I had my crystal ball in front of me, I keep thinking about like the opportunity to go into really specific verticals that you would just never touch before.
Yeah.
But now you can create those 200 and 250 versions of messaging, start to tag, start to experiment, and do that really quick.
Right. You think about this.
The opportunity's there for
you think about this. Like there was this dynamic. Like I think that if your ACV is less than 20,000, you can use reps to go do transactions. Right. You either have to put them in a local geo, or you have to be more inbound or PLG. Right. This changes everything, because now if AI makes a rep 4 times more productive, that means that the cost of that rep is a fourth. So that means that you can have that rep do 4 times the volume on $20,000 transactions. So all of a sudden, all transaction value becomes available to your sales team. That changes everything.
Yeah,
It really does.
it really does. And you know, there's a lot of shit talking the AI SDR concept out there. And whenever I see this much energy put towards something, I'm like, I'm nervous, right? Like there's a lot of hate for it, which tells me it's very close to love, right? It's like hate and love are just very 1 degree off. How do you think that's going to shake out?
Well, so first of all, right now, everybody so the stuff that you see out there is either things like what qualifies 6 cents and even sales for which is just inbound qualifying. So that's not a real SDR, right? Like and we've seen that before. Like that is good, but it's not like moving the deal forward. Is when you start having cold outbounding, you know what I mean, or expansion SDRs, which is closer to what 11x and the other guys are doing. So that's when it starts getting interesting. Now, you still have to put it in a workflow, and that's what hasn't happened yet. And this is what I'm hoping agents are going to help you do. Is that it's fine to send a bunch of emails, or it's fine to tailor something to somebody else, but at some point you got to call somebody. At some point you got to follow up. At some point you have to multi-thread. At some point you have to qualify. You see what I mean? And all that assisted by an agent really takes off. So the people who should be practicing their AI is more the AEs. The AEs get paid way more than an SDR. Like an OT for an AE, the average around here is what, 200 to 50? That's a lot of money. You see what I mean? And you need to see a lot of productivity. And if you want 4 to 5x that to be able to to fit into your right sales efficiency, that means that every AE needs to be producing $1 million to $1.5 million.
Yeah,
you need AI.
Yep.
Yeah. The objection handling piece for me is always the sticking point, because I think about who could actually write down or has enough good data recorded, right? You've had conversational intelligence for however long. I mean, how much good data do you have of examples of somebody objection handling really well across all of your products? Do you even have that?
And objection handling is one of those things that is kind of like the George Costanza, where like the comeback comes to you after. You know what I mean? Like, so like you need it like right in the moment. And the funny thing is that, so we did this analysis early in outreach when with our first machine learning hire. Our first machine learning hire, we're like, I want to analyze like what makes for a good interaction with an SDR. So we did this thing with Glassdoor, and we came back, and it turns out that an objection well handled converts at like 3x higher than a positive engagement. So if you get a positive reply or a positive call, whatever, that may die at some point. An objection well handled gets you the distance. Because there's real tension. Because you probably, what happened, in my hypothesis, what happened is that you got an objection that was going to happen later on, earlier in the deal. So that thing that will kill your deal later just happened to you earlier, and you handle it earlier, and now the risk is a lot lower.
Yeah.
I remember at Oracle, someone's monitor right next to me, it says, bad news early is good news.
Of course.
Right?
Exactly. Because like the risk is lower, and you just turn somebody into an advocate.
Yeah. Wow. Let's go a second further on AI, putting aside outreach and even ZoomInfo's products, which we'll talk about in a second. If someone's coming up to speed on AI, they've just taken over a go-to-market team, obviously you can do content creation, right? Copy is sort of like the first place people jump. How should folks conceptualize like the different levels of like, okay, first thing to do with AI, second thing to do with AI, like play the demo for us?
Content creation is an easy one, and it's look, as a platform that transacts over, I don't know, like many millions of emails per day, I can tell you a lot of them are crap. And AI does a significantly better job composing emails. And it's not because there is ill intent. It's just like, English is a complicated language, and, engaging is really hard, and AI just does a much better job at it. So that one is sort of like, table stakes. The part that I wish was better and more adopted is getting deal summaries, account summaries, meeting summaries, and training the manager to stop asking for the TLDR.
Yeah.
It's such a waste of fucking time. Just think about that. Tell me about this deal. Well, you want me to Google that for you? Like, you just self-serve. Like this, everybody at this point has a generative version of a meeting summary, of a deal summary, and you still don't see a lot of use.
And they're going to be way better.
You're going to be more informed, and then you can go to your rep and actually give them advice. I mean, like, hey, I read this thing. what do you think? And now you got a productive conversation as opposed to like, catch me up to speed. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Cars fucking drive themselves and you're asking for deal summaries? Are you kidding me?
100%. It's really interesting because I've talked a lot, I feel like in our conversations internally and with some of these other sort of like, I don't know, folks that I've been on podcasts and speaking with, and we've talked a lot about like the shift in skill sets for the SDR over time. But I also think what's really interesting is you're talking about like flattening and like the playing field. There's going to be a little less top down because like you can go and self-serve your own information
100%.
as a manager, as a senior leader, etc. And you're going to have to learn or unlearn the, I'm going to push that down.
Yep.
Right. And just be able to do it yourself because that's going to be the expectation and like the change in behavior.
100%.
That's going to take some time.
And not only that, but like, if you follow through, what happens after that is that, so you get the TLDR and the rep is going to tell you a story, and it's going to be a happy story about a deal that is not going to close. So then what you do, you put it in the forecast. You see what I mean? So all of a sudden, now you're wrong in the forecast too. And now you're overcommitted, and then you make a mistake, and then you start doubting the depth and the rep. And now every time the rep gives you something, you discount it by 20% because he's fuck you in the past. So there is all this bad behavior from not using AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. You won't be able to hide.
Right.
Anymore
Exactly.
In such a big way.
Yep.
And I think when that starts to become really real, that's where I think that'll drive some of that adoption, or we'll start to see
100%.
some new adoption.
100%. Especially because the good manager are going to say, this is why I know about the deal. This is what I think we should do. How can we make you more successful? You know what I mean? How can we work together on this now that I have all this information?
Who's the smartest person that you've ever known, and what did you learn from them?
I'm very blessed of knowing a lot of smart people, and they all have been influential in different ways. When I was in college, there was this guy who was so smart, but he wasn't just smart in terms of, book smart. He was very good with math and calculus. But he convinced me that I could be smart too. I always thought that I wasn't smart enough, that I wasn't, this is really difficult, like maybe I'm not for this thing.
Was it him?
I went to school, and his name is Alexander, and he lives in Germany. But he's Ecuadorian, just like me. And he was the smartest guy I knew. And it's very rare to know somebody really smart who makes you feel smart.
Manny, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience. Tell listeners how they can keep in touch with you online.
Please, look me up on LinkedIn. I respond to every LinkedIn message. And yeah, I'm out there.
Love it. And congrats on bringing in the new CEO, you as executive chairman. We're very excited to see we continue to take outreach, and we just really appreciate you coming on the ZI Labs podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. This is awesome.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast.
With new episodes dropping every Monday and Thursday, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me and Ben on LinkedIn and visit zoominfo.com/labs to get in touch.